to the podcast series of MediaClimate, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Chris Frost, your full name, and please present yourself first, and also a little bit of information about the Journalism Education Journal.
Sure. I'm Emeritus Professor of Journalism at Liverpool John Moores University. I retired a few years ago. I've been a journalist most of my working life, first practicing and then moving into the academy. I'm a National Executive Council member of the National Union of Journalists, and I chair the union's Ethics Council. So I keep up my work on journalism ethics in particular, but also on journalism education. So that's me. Journalism education, the journal started in 2011. The Association for Journalism Education in the UK, which had started a few years before, felt that it would be very useful to have a journal for our members, particularly as so many of our members had moved, like me, from journalism into education and had found it a whole new world with a whole range of different problems. And that whilst writing was still important, the writing styles and the way that one researched them were significantly different. And we felt that members needed support with that. But also we wanted to expand the range of research that both members and other academics were doing in the field of journalism. And so we started the Journal then. And we try to produce 3 issues a year. We don't always get enough in order to do that, but we usually manage to produce 2 a year. So that's the journal. It's, I think, very useful. Our members find it very useful, and I hope others do as well.
How wide is the circulation in countries outside the UK? Do you know?
It's difficult to tell. It's web-based, so people access it through the web, which, if I can give a quick plug, is journalism-education.org. And so if you want to see any of the journals, they're all there. You can go in and they're indexed and supported. But it's difficult to tell. I mean, I suppose I ought to ask our web mistress what actually is going on there and how many approaches we get. But I'm afraid I don't know.
Well, and now the last issue is actually an issue on climate journalism education. And as you, I share the background of being both a journalist and a journalist educator. So that's interesting too. I would like you to say a few words about why you were selected or were positive to accept this issue, because we are guest editors. I'm one of them, Elizabeth Eide, by the way, from Oslo Metropolitan University. Why was it that you took on this? We were happy, of course.
First, I'm very grateful to you for bringing it to our attention and suggesting that you do this, and doing, frankly, quite a lot of that, or most of the hard work involved in producing the articles, editing them and getting them ready. But the subject matter is incredibly important. I mean, obviously, you think that. I think most of the world thinks that. The only thing slowing it down in any way are those who prefer money to actually having somewhere to live. And that's a problem that we come across time after time. Clearly, climate change is incredibly important. How we deal with it is incredibly important. And it's important for journalists to understand that and to be educated in that and learn about what the big problems are and how to deal with them. And we feel we have quite an important part to play in that kind of education, both of the educators themselves and then on to their students, so that paper such as the ones we published in this particular issue, I think are incredibly important. And I was very pleased with the range and breadth of articles you were able to gather and that we were able to publish. I think it's an important issue.
Yes, we have contributors both from the African subcontinent, such as Kenya and Uganda. We have from Asia, we have Bangladesh, we have Pakistan, we have India contributions. And then we have a sample article from the Nordic countries, and then one from your own country, from the UK. So it's not too bad.
It's very good, and I'm very pleased that we were able to make it so widely international. It makes it a very important issue, I think.
But that reflects, in a way, also the aim of the MediaClimate Network, which is also a very wide network. and its aim is to be there on all continents in a sense. How would you think such an issue can contribute to changes within journalism education itself?
Well, I think if we educate journalism students about the importance of the issue, they're going to be much more aware of those kind of stories and not just put them in a little pigeonhole saying, oh, this is just climate change or this is just climate activists, and actually see that this is something that should underpin basically all their work, because unless we get the climate back into balance, none of us is going to be here for very much longer. And whilst, if I may say so, that might not affect you and I quite as much, it's certainly going to affect our children and our grandchildren and all their friends and colleagues. And therefore, it's incredibly important that our students should be fully aware of the issues so that they can report them as part of pretty much every story that they're working on. And I think that that's incredibly useful.
Yes, I think one of the aims that we've had when we edited the volume was connection. I mean, to connect the dots, as climate researcher James Hansen once said. And that means also that the journalism, when it comes to climate, does not have to be separate courses. It could be integrated in other courses. Like I know, for example, assistant professor Saqib has done in Lahore, Pakistan, where you can integrate climate issues in news journalism stories. So in Bangladesh, they've done it with the reportage journalism and so on and so forth. You can just select climate as a topic for whatever investigation journalists, students have to make. Do you think it also could reach out to practicing journalists who perhaps have not gone to journalism school or do not intend to go there?
Well, I'd like to think that it does. I mean, I have to say, my history of working with journalists is the amount of time they get to spend to actually rebuild what they're doing is pretty limited. And I give a lot of advice through my ethics council work with the NUJ to various charities and organizations who come to me and say, oh, we think we ought to produce guidelines on this or that or whatever it might be. And my advice is always short, but keep it as short and as tight as you possibly can. Do feel free to run it past us so that we can advise you, because frankly, if you produce a 32-page booklet on the dangers of this or that, the chances are that very few journalists will actually get the time to read it. So we need to be aware that time is a real cost for journalists. They're pushed all the time these days. I know that staff cuts have happened around the world, but they've been particularly prevalent in the UK, where huge numbers of journalists have been laid off. And the remaining few journalists are expected to pick up the slack, and they don't have time to get the additional training that personally I think they ought to. It's something that we try within the union to combat. I mean, I think next week I'll be doing a webinar looking at AI and its effects on journalism, and particularly journalism ethics. And we usually get pretty good turnout to those. Anything up to 100 members will tune in to hear what our speakers, who are usually experts in their field, have to say. So there is interest amongst members to learn about issues like this, to advance their knowledge, but we have to accept that they're often very pressed for time.
I think you're now confirming a process of despecialization, as researchers have called it, within the field of journalism, since there are fewer staff in any editorial room. But one last question I want to ask of you, Chris, is about which obstacles do educators meet if they want to eagerly promote climate as an issue within existing courses or as separate courses?
Well, there are several challenges that one has to come over. I mean, certainly in the UK, we are both trying to fit our course into what the university will validate as an appropriate course. But we're also well aware that there are professional standards that we probably need to apply. We have something called the National Council for the Training of Journalists, and they have their own assessments. And a lot of our students find it useful to get their certificates in order to advance their careers. And therefore, the universities try and fit the courses a little bit around their syllabus. which is, it's not a bad syllabus, but it does slightly straitjacket some of the work that we're doing and limits what we would like to do. I remember I worked on the working party that produced or started to develop one of the very first journalism degrees in the UK. And we said, well, what do we think we should put in this? And we all had these great ideas, and we put this forward and that forward and that forward. And then we worked it out, and I think it would have taken 7 years to deliver just our basic ideas then. And of course, things have expanded enormously in the technology field, in climate change, and so on since then. And those would all be in addition. So it's always a fight with any course to fit in the sort of basic skills, the basic requirements of a journalist, the basic things that they need to learn, the ability to be able to criticize, to develop, to examine, to investigate, and then draw that together, along with law and ethics and everything else. So it's like specifically a class about climate change probably would just be that a single class. And then you talk through, and that's why something like the journal I think is incredibly useful, because you're able to get students to say, well, look, read this is really interesting. So
I
hopefully
think
students are reading it too.
I think I'd wrap it up by also having another question about journalist domestication, which is sort of being, well, in sociology, they call it methodological nationalism. But in journalism, it could well be called domestication, because this is purely it's a very global issue. So how can one, with this journal, which spans from continent to continent in the articles we have published, how can that help enabling journalists to have a global perspective on their coverage of climate?
Yeah, it is a problem that one becomes reduced to looking just at your own particular area. And I don't think, again, that the reduction in the number of journalists, the requirement for each journalist to do a lot more, but probably in a relatively narrow field, has helped that. But we are becoming more global. Social media, I think, helps with that. We have contacts with people outside of our own local area or national area in a way that really wasn't happening, say, 20, 25 years ago. And whilst not all of that is good, I think we have to accept some of it, maybe not. We do learn a lot more from social media than perhaps we would have learned from our newspapers and from our broadcasters 20, 30 years ago. So I think there is some hope that we get a much wider feel of what's happening globally when we use social media appropriately. And if we manage to squeeze out some of the more disgraceful material that's there.
Yeah, MediaClimate has a Facebook page too. I'm being told that the younger generations are not so much there, so we'll have to also discuss whether we can expand our activities in that field. Thank you so much, Chris Frost, for being with us for this occasion of the launch of the Journalism Education Journal number 2, 2024. It was a pleasure having you.
Very nice to talk to you. Bye.